Put the handcuffs on him, right now. The command sliced through the warm June air just as Marcus Carter stepped toward the podium beneath the towering blue and gold banner that read Jefferson High School Class of 2026. For one suspended heartbeat, nobody moved. Then two Richmond police officers climbed the stage, their polished shoes echoing against the wooden platform, while thousands of parents, teachers, and students stared in confused silence. Marcus didn't flinch. At 18 years old, he stood 6 feet tall, wearing a neatly pressed graduation gown over a white dress shirt his mother had ironed before sunrise. The gold valedictorian stole rested across his shoulders, and the medal recognizing him as Virginia's state STEM scholar caught the afternoon sunlight. His fingers still held the folded speech he had spent months rewriting, but as the officers approached, he slowly lowered his hand. A murmur rolled through the football stadium like distant thunder. "What's happening?" Someone whispered from the front rows. "There has to be a mistake," another voice answered. High above them, an American flag drifted gently in the summer breeze while television cameras continued broadcasting the ceremony live across the state. Marcus could hear every sound with impossible clarity: the rustle of graduation gowns, the squeak of folding chairs, the clicking lenses of news photographers, and somewhere near the 50-yard line, the nervous cry of a baby who had no idea history was quietly changing around him. Principal Linda Brooks hurried toward the officers, her face drained of color. "Officers, can this wait until after the ceremony?" she asked carefully. Before either officer could answer, a sharp voice rose from the VIP seating section. "No," the man called out. "It cannot wait another second." Every head turned toward Richard Collins, the founder of Collins Advanced Systems and one of the school's largest donors. Dressed in a tailored Navy suit despite the 83-degree afternoon, he pointed directly at Marcus with complete certainty. "That young man stole my son's technology. He's been pretending it's his invention for nearly a year." Gasps rippled across the stadium. Students exchanged stunned looks. Parents lifted their phones, recording every second. Marcus looked toward Richard, his expression calm despite the accusation hanging over the field. "Sir," Marcus said evenly, "that's not true." Richard laughed once, cold and dismissive. "Save it for the investigators." One of the officers stepped closer. "Marcus Carter?" "Yes, sir. We've received a formal complaint regarding intellectual property theft. We need you to come with us." Marcus nodded once. "May I ask if anyone reviewed the original project files?" The officer hesitated. "That's not my decision." Marcus glanced toward the audience until his eyes found his mother, Angela Carter, sitting beside his younger sister. Angela worked 12-hour shifts as a registered nurse at VCU Medical Center, and she still wore the tiny silver cross Marcus had given her after winning his first robotics competition at age 12. She slowly stood, confusion replacing the joyful smile she had carried all morning. "Marcus," she whispered, barely audible from the stands. Marcus offered her the smallest, reassuring smile. "It's okay, Mom." Richard folded his arms. "Listen to him." Still pretending to be innocent, Ethan Collins sat beside his father, staring at the ground instead of Marcus. His graduation cap hid most of his face, but his hands trembled in his lap. Marcus noticed. So did no one else. The stadium announcer awkwardly lowered his microphone while school board members exchanged uncertain glances near the stage stairs. Somewhere behind the media platform, a television producer quietly instructed his crew not to stop filming. Whatever was unfolding had already become bigger than a graduation ceremony. The first officer reached for the standard-issue handcuffs hanging from his duty belt. "Marcus," he said respectfully, "please place your hands behind your back." A long silence settled across the field. Marcus closed his eyes for a single breath before calmly extending his graduation speech to Principal Brooks. "Would you hold this for me?" he asked softly. She accepted the folded pages with trembling hands. "Marcus, I don't understand." "You will," he answered with quiet confidence. "Just make sure someone checks the timestamps before deciding who the inventor really is." The officer gently secured the handcuffs without resistance. No shouting, no struggle. Only the metallic click echoed through the silent stadium, louder than any applause that had filled the field all afternoon. Nearly 3,000 people watched without speaking. Even the wind seemed to stop, and somewhere beyond the stunned crowd, a black SUV carrying the President of the United States had just entered the secured entrance behind the stadium, arriving moments before a truth no one there was prepared to witness. The metallic click of the handcuffs still lingered in the air as Marcus Carter stood quietly at the edge of the stage, his eyes following the rows of stunned faces that only moments earlier had been smiling with pride. He had imagined this day hundreds of times, but never like this. 24 hours earlier, life had felt wonderfully ordinary. The first rays of morning sunlight slipped through the blinds of the small brick duplex on Richmond's south side, where Marcus had lived his entire life. His bedroom was barely large enough for a twin bed, a worn desk, and shelves crowded with circuit boards, engineering textbooks, robotics, trophies, and notebooks filled with sketches. Every inch of the room reflected years of determination rather than money. On the workbench beside the window rested the prototype that had changed everything. A compact emergency communication device designed to restore wireless connections after hurricanes, floods, and tornadoes disabled traditional infrastructure. It was not polished or beautiful, but it worked. Marcus smiled as he gently adjusted one final circuit. "You still talking to your inventions?" his younger sister Naomi teased from the doorway. Marcus laughed softly without looking up. "Only the stubborn ones." Naomi crossed her arms. "Mom says breakfast is getting cold. Tell her 2 more minutes. You always say 2 more minutes, because it usually takes 3. Naomi rolled her eyes and disappeared down the hallway while Marcus carefully saved the latest design files onto 3 separate storage devices before uploading an encrypted backup to his cloud account. He had developed the habit months earlier after his engineering mentor repeatedly reminded him that ideas were valuable only if they could be proven to belong to their creator. Every file carried automatic timestamps accurate to the second. Marcus never imagined those tiny digital records would one day become more important than the invention itself. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled of fresh pancakes and cinnamon. Angela Carter poured orange juice into paper cups because she refused to unpack the expensive glassware she had been saving for the day Marcus graduated. "Big day tomorrow," she said with a smile that reached her tired eyes. Marcus kissed her cheek. "Big day for you too. You worked harder than I did." Angela shook her head. "Do not you dare give me your credit. I only kept the lights on. You built your future." His grandfather, Walter Carter, looked up from the newspaper folded neatly beside his plate. A retired electrical technician with silver hair and steady hands, Walter had been Marcus's first science teacher long before school introduced algebra or physics. "Remember something," Walter said quietly. "People will always admire success until it reminds them of what they failed to become." Marcus looked puzzled. "That sounds complicated." Walter smiled. "It is supposed to. You will understand someday." Later that afternoon, Marcus drove his aging pickup truck across the James River to Jefferson High School for one final rehearsal before graduation. Teachers waved as he entered the science wing. Students congratulated him on earning a full scholarship to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Even custodians who had watched him spend late nights in the engineering lab stopped to wish him luck. Mrs. Eleanor Hess, as a robotics advisor, handed Marcus a neatly folded copy of his valedictorian speech. "I made one extra print just in case," she said. Marcus accepted it gratefully. "Thank you for believing in me before anyone else did." Mrs. Hayes smiled warmly. "I did not believe in you because of talent. I believed in you because every time an experiment failed, you came back the next morning smiling." As Marcus left the classroom, he noticed Ethan Collins standing alone near the trophy display. Ethan looked unusually nervous. "Hey," Marcus greeted him. "Ready for tomorrow?" Ethan forced a weak smile. "Yeah, big day," Marcus nodded kindly. "Congratulations on graduating." Ethan hesitated as if he wanted to say something more. But before he could answer, Richard Collins appeared at the end of the hallway. His polished shoes echoed sharply against the tile floor. "Ethan," Richard called. "We are leaving." Ethan lowered his eyes immediately. "Coming, Dad." Richard briefly glanced toward Marcus, offering nothing more than a cold, unreadable stare before turning away. Marcus watched them disappear through the front entrance, unaware that behind Richard's calm expression a decision had already been made, one that would transform the following afternoon from a celebration of achievement into a public test of truth, dignity, and character. Richard Collins did not become one of Virginia's most recognizable technology executives by trusting coincidence. He trusted leverage, timing, and the quiet influence that came with writing very large checks. As the founder of Collins Advanced Systems, he had spent more than 20 years building a reputation that opened doors before he ever knocked. School boards welcomed his donations. Universities invited him to keynote ceremonies. Local politicians happily stood beside him during ribbon cuttings. To most people in Richmond, he represented success. Only those closest to him understood that losing was something he simply did not tolerate. Less than 3 months before graduation, Richard had walked through the exhibition hall of the Virginia State Student Innovation Challenge in Norfolk, with little interest in the projects surrounding him. His son Ethan had qualified for the finals, and Richard expected another predictable award to decorate the family office. Then he stopped in front of a modest display assembled from inexpensive aluminum framing and handwritten presentation boards. Marcus Carter stood there patiently explaining how his emergency communication device could restore localized wireless networks after hurricanes by creating temporary mesh connections between portable transmitters. Firefighters, hospitals, and emergency shelters could continue communicating even when traditional infrastructure failed. Richard listened without interrupting. Marcus answered every technical question with quiet confidence, never exaggerating what his invention could accomplish, and never claiming it would solve every problem. That honesty impressed several judges. It also caught Richard's attention. After the presentation ended, Richard approached Marcus with a polished smile. "Young man," he said while extending his hand, "I am impressed. Have you ever considered commercial development?" Marcus shook his hand respectfully. "Eventually, sir. Right now, I just want the technology to reach emergency responders who actually need it." Richard nodded slowly. "Dreams require funding. My company can provide that." Marcus smiled gratefully. "I appreciate the offer, but my mentor and I already filed the provisional patent application through the state program. We are planning to continue after college." Richard's smile barely changed, but something behind his eyes quietly hardened. "You already filed?" "Yes, sir. About 6 weeks ago." Richard offered a polite congratulations before walking away, yet the answer stayed with him throughout the drive back to Richmond. Inside his luxury sedan, he finally broke the silence. "He is 18, he muttered. "He does not even understand what he has." Ethan sat beside him looking through photographs from the competition. "Dad, Marcus really built everything himself." Richard kept his eyes on the highway. "Talent is valuable. Ownership is negotiable." Ethan lowered the phone. "That does not sound right," Richard answered without emotion. "The world rewards the people who control ideas, not always the people who create them." Over the following weeks, Ethan grew increasingly uncomfortable. He often saw his father making phone calls behind closed office doors, requesting copies of public competition records, contacting sponsors, and quietly asking questions about Marcus's project. One evening, Ethan finally spoke. "Dad, why are you so interested in his invention?" Richard poured himself a cup of coffee before answering. "Because investors are already asking about emergency communication systems. Timing is everything." Ethan hesitated. Marcus earned that opportunity. Richard looked directly at his son. "Opportunity belongs to whoever can protect it." Ethan said nothing more, but guilt settled heavily across his face. The night before graduation, while Marcus celebrated quietly with his family, Richard remained inside his downtown office overlooking the James River. The city lights reflected across the glass walls as folders covered his conference table. Newspaper articles praised Marcus as Virginia's youngest engineering innovator. Scholarship announcements highlighted his acceptance into the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Local television stations promoted his upcoming valedictorian speech. Richard closed every article one by one. Then he picked up his phone. "Everything is ready?" he asked. A calm voice answered from the other end. "Yes, the complaint has been filed." Richard walked toward the window overlooking the Richmond skyline. "Good. Once questions are raised publicly, the ceremony will stop. Reputation is fragile. Even if he is cleared later, people always remember the accusation first." Ethan had quietly entered the office without his father noticing. He heard every word. "Dad," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "please do not do this." Richard turned slowly. "Go home, Ethan. He did nothing wrong. You are too young to understand how business works." Ethan swallowed hard. "Maybe, but I know the difference between winning and taking something that belongs to someone else." Richard stared at him for several long seconds before picking up his suit jacket. "Tomorrow will be an important day for this family." Ethan watched his father leave the office, the elevator doors closing with a soft, metallic sound that echoed through the empty floor. Alone in the silence, he looked once more at the competition photographs stored on his phone. In every picture, Marcus stood beside his invention with the same humble smile. Ethan quietly closed his eyes, realizing that by sunrise the truth would be forced into a fight it had never asked to join. The officers guided Marcus Carter down the short staircase beside the graduation stage, but they never had to pull or rush him. He walked with the same steady pace that had carried him across science fairs, scholarship interviews, and late nights inside the engineering lab. His shoulders remained straight. His breathing stayed calm. The only thing that had changed was the sound of the handcuffs gently brushing against the fabric of his graduation gown with every step. Around the stadium, thousands of conversations erupted at once. Some parents looked confused. Others looked convinced they had just witnessed a criminal being stopped before receiving an honor he did not deserve. Cell phones filled the air like tiny mirrors reflecting the afternoon sun. Every angle was recorded. Every whisper became another version of the story before anyone knew the facts. Principal Linda Brooks hurried after the officers. "Please," she said quietly. "At least let him explain." The senior officer answered respectfully. "Ma'am, we are only following procedure while the complaint is reviewed." Marcus turned toward her before she could speak again. "It is all right, Principal Brooks. They are doing their job." His words surprised even the officers. There was no anger in his voice, no bitterness, only quiet confidence. Angela Carter pushed through the front row with Naomi close behind. Tears had filled Naomi's eyes, but Angela gently held her daughter's shoulder. "Marcus," Angela called, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Look at me," Marcus did. "I am okay, Mom. We know who you are," she answered. "Do not ever forget that." Walter Carter slowly rose from his seat beside them. His weathered face remained calm even as countless cameras turned toward the family. "Hold your head high, grandson," he said firmly. "Truth does not panic." Marcus smiled faintly. "Yes, sir, not far away." Richard Collins stood surrounded by several school board members and local reporters. One journalist raised a microphone. "Mr. Collins, are you saying the valedictorian stole your son's invention?" Richard adjusted his tie before answering with practiced confidence. "I believe the evidence will speak for itself. Intellectual property deserves protection regardless of who is involved." His words sounded measured, almost noble, yet Ethan Collins felt each sentence settle like a stone inside his chest. He stepped closer to his father and spoke quietly enough that nearby reporters could not hear. "Dad, please stop this before it goes any further." Richard never looked at him. "It already has. You know Marcus built that project. Watch what happens next." Ethan looked across the stadium toward Marcus, who was now sitting on a folding chair beneath a shaded security tent beside the field. One officer removed his graduation cap and carefully placed it on the table so it would not fall to the ground. Another handed Marcus a bottle of water. "Thank you," Marcus said sincerely. The younger officer hesitated before speaking. "For what it is worth, son, I hope this gets sorted out quickly." Marcus nodded. "So do I." Back on the main stage, the ceremony had completely stopped. The school orchestra sat silently with instruments resting in their laps. Graduates shifted nervously in their seats, uncertain whether to remain seated or leave. Principal Brooks approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "we ask for your patience while the matter is being reviewed." Before she could continue, a voice interrupted from the press section. "The president's motorcade has arrived." Heads immediately turned toward the secured entrance behind the stadium. Black sport utility vehicles rolled slowly through the gate, escorted by Secret Service agents who quickly moved into position. The presidential visit had been scheduled weeks earlier as part of a national education initiative celebrating student achievement. No one expected the ceremony to be frozen when the motorcade arrived. Inside the lead vehicle, President Daniel Whitmore reviewed the prepared schedule resting on a leather folder. His senior advisor leaned toward him. "Sir, there has been an unexpected situation on the field." The president looked up. "What kind of situation?" "The student scheduled to deliver the valedictorian address has been detained after a public accusation involving an invention." The president closed the folder without another word. Through the tinted window, he could already see the silent crowd, the unfinished ceremony, and a young graduate sitting alone beneath a white canopy with his hands still restrained. He frowned slightly. "Before anyone resumes this program," he said calmly, "I want to know exactly what happened." At that same moment, inside Jefferson High School's administrative building overlooking the football field, Superintendent Karen Mitchell unlocked the conference room where the original competition records were stored. Around the large oak table gathered the State Science Committee, the district legal advisor, representatives from the Innovation Challenge, and two independent technology specialists. Karen placed a sealed evidence envelope in the center of the table. "We are not leaving this room," she said firmly, until we determine who created that invention first. Inside the conference room overlooking Jefferson High School's football stadium, the atmosphere felt strangely heavier than the summer heat outside. The thick oak doors had been closed. Window blinds filtered the bright afternoon sunlight into narrow bands that stretched across stacks of documents, laptop computers, and sealed evidence folders. Superintendent Karen Mitchell stood at the head of the table while representatives from the Virginia State Innovation Challenge quietly connected encrypted storage drives to a secure workstation. Nobody rushed. Nobody wanted to make a mistake that could damage a young man's future forever. "We are recording every step," Karen announced. "Chain of custody begins now." One technology specialist nodded. "Screen recording is active. File verification is active. Metadata extraction is active." Another investigator adjusted his glasses. "Let us begin with the original patent submission." Outside, nearly 3,000 people remained seated inside the stadium despite the delay. The June sun slowly drifted westward, casting longer shadows across the football field. No one seemed interested in leaving anymore. What had begun as a graduation ceremony had become something else entirely. News helicopters circled overhead, while television anchors spoke quietly into cameras, careful not to speculate before official findings were released. Beneath the white security canopy, Marcus Carter sat calmly with his hands still restrained in front of him. The younger police officer handed him another bottle of water. "You have been remarkably patient," the officer admitted. Marcus smiled politely. "Getting angry will not change the truth." The officer studied him for a moment. "You really believe everything will work out?" Marcus looked toward the engineering building visible beyond the stadium. "Because I know exactly when every file was created." A few feet away, Angela Carter remained standing behind the temporary security barrier. She refused to leave despite repeated offers to wait inside the school lobby. Naomi leaned quietly against her mother while Walter Carter kept his eyes fixed on the administrative building. "Granddad," Naomi whispered, "why is everybody taking so long?" Walter answered softly, "Because real truth takes time. Lies travel fast. Facts walk." Nearby, Richard Collins continued speaking confidently with reporters. "My family has cooperated fully," he declared. "We simply ask that intellectual property laws be respected." One journalist raised another question. "Do you have documentation proving your son's ownership?" Richard answered without hesitation. "Our attorneys have already submitted everything necessary." Ethan Collins lowered his head. Every sentence made him more uncomfortable. He quietly stepped away from the cameras and walked toward the empty practice field behind the stadium. His phone vibrated in his pocket. The screen displayed 6 unread messages from classmates. None asked whether he was all right. Every message asked the same question. "Did Marcus really steal your project?" Ethan stared at the words without replying. Inside the conference room, one of the forensic analysts finally spoke. "We have located both project archives." Another investigator looked up. "Open Marcus Carter's submission first." The large monitor illuminated the room as encrypted folders appeared on the screen. Every file contained automatic timestamps generated months before the competition. Design sketches, simulation reports, source code revisions, laboratory notes, video demonstrations. Everything appeared meticulously organized. Karen Mitchell folded her arm. "Continue." The analyst opened another folder labeled Prototype Development Journal. Hundreds of entries appeared, each documenting daily progress with photographs, handwritten engineering notes, and testing results dating back almost 11 months. "This is unusually thorough," one committee member observed. He documented nearly every revision. The analyst nodded. "Every entry carries independent cloud verification." Across the table, another specialist inserted the storage device submitted with Ethan Collins's paperwork. A second archive appeared on the monitor. Silence settled over the room as they compared both timelines side by side. One engineer leaned closer to the screen. "Wait." Karen looked up immediately. "What is it?" The engineer enlarged 2 folders containing nearly identical circuit layouts. "These design files are almost identical." Another investigator frowned. "Can you determine which one came first?" "That depends on the original metadata." Karen took a slow breath. "Then verify everything." Fingers moved rapidly across keyboards while software examined thousands of hidden digital records invisible during ordinary file viewing. Outside, President Daniel Whitmore stood quietly beneath a shaded hospitality tent after receiving his security briefing. His senior advisor approached carrying a tablet. "Sir, the investigation is underway." The president looked toward Marcus, who remained seated alone beneath the canopy. "Has anyone spoken with the student?" "Only briefly. Did he deny the accusation? No, sir. The advisor paused before continuing. He simply asked investigators to check the original timestamps. The president remained silent for several moments. Interesting, he finally said. Most innocent people defend themselves first. Engineers usually defend the evidence. He watched Marcus from across the field as a gentle breeze lifted the edge of the young graduate's gown. There was no panic in the teenager's face, only quiet patience, and somehow that silence seemed louder than every accusation that had filled the stadium only minutes before. The conference room became so quiet that the soft hum of the forensic workstation sounded louder than the voices that had filled the stadium outside. Every investigator leaned toward the large monitor as lines of verified metadata continued scrolling across the screen. No one reached for coffee anymore. No one checked a phone. The evidence had begun speaking for itself. The lead forensic analyst rested his hand on the keyboard. Original creation date confirmed, he said carefully. Marcus Carter began this project 11 months and 4 days before the state competition. Karen Mitchell looked toward another specialist. Verify the cloud authentication. The second analyst nodded while opening the encrypted backup records. Within seconds, another confirmation appeared. Cloud timestamps match perfectly. Independent servers recorded every upload. No alterations detected. Around the table, several committee members exchanged silent glances. One engineer quietly whispered, "That is nearly impossible to fabricate." Karen folded her hands together. Continue. The monitor displayed hundreds of revision logs, each documenting improvements made over nearly a year. Every adjustment carried precise timestamps down to the second. Every design sketch connected naturally to the next. Every engineering note reflected problems solved through trial, error, and persistence. There were no sudden jumps. No unexplained gaps, only the steady rhythm of genuine invention. The lead analyst opened Ethan Collins's project archive next. The room remained silent. Original creation date, he announced after several seconds. His eyebrows slowly tightened. 8 months after Marcus Carter's first verified prototype. Another investigator leaned closer. Run the source comparison. Specialized software immediately began scanning thousands of lines of engineering notes, diagrams, and programming code. Colored indicators gradually filled the screen. Green, yellow, then long sections of identical blue. One committee member quietly exhaled. That similarity percentage is unusually high. Karen looked directly at the analysts. Can we determine direction? The youngest forensic engineer answered with complete confidence. Yes. Marcus's files contain progressive development history. Ethan's archive contains completed sections appearing all at once. That pattern usually indicates copying rather than original design. Nobody spoke for several moments. Outside, the afternoon sun softened into a warm, golden light that stretched across the empty running track surrounding the football field. The graduates remained seated despite the unexpected delay. Families waited patiently. Even conversations had become quieter, as though everyone instinctively understood that something important was unfolding behind the school walls. Beneath the security canopy, Marcus sat with his eyes fixed on the engineering building, where countless evenings had disappeared into experiments, failed prototypes, and handwritten calculations. The younger police officer noticed his gaze. "You spent a lot of time over there?" Marcus smiled gently. "Almost every day after class." "Worth it?" Marcus looked toward the distant windows reflecting the sunlight. "Learning always is." The officer remained silent before quietly saying, "I hope they see what you already know." Nearby, President Daniel Whitmore stood beside the stadium tunnel, speaking softly with his education advisor. "What have we learned?" he asked. The advisor checked the latest secure message arriving from the conference room. "The technical review is moving quickly, sir. Early findings strongly favor the student." The president nodded once but asked another question instead. "How has the young man behaved?" "Respectfully, calmly. He has not accused anyone. He has only asked investigators to verify the evidence." The president looked across the field again. Character often reveals itself during unfair moments, not comfortable ones. At almost that exact second, inside the conference room, another investigator opened the school's internal laboratory security recordings. "Camera archives recovered," he announced. Video thumbnails appeared one after another across the large display. Dates matched the engineering journal precisely. Marcus appeared repeatedly inside the laboratory, sometimes alone after sunset, sometimes working beside Mrs. Eleanor Hayes while adjusting circuits and testing communication signals across the classroom. The footage stretched across months. One committee member quietly smiled. He practically lived here. Then another recording appeared. The timestamp showed a Saturday afternoon nearly 3 months earlier. Marcus carefully stored his prototype inside a locked cabinet before leaving the laboratory. 15 minutes later, another student entered using an authorized visitor badge. The room suddenly became completely still. The video clearly showed Ethan Collins walking toward the same cabinet after looking around the empty laboratory. Nobody spoke. Nobody even moved. Karen Mitchell slowly removed her glasses, her expression changing from uncertainty to disbelief. "Freeze that frame," she said softly. The image stopped with Ethan standing directly beside Marcus's secured project cabinet. The only sound left in the room came from the quiet spinning of the computer's cooling fan. Outside, the breeze gently lifted the American flag above Jefferson High School, while nearly 3,000 people unknowingly waited for a truth that was only moments away from changing every life inside that stadium. Karen Mitchell kept her eyes fixed on the frozen security image, while nobody around the conference table dared to speak first. Ethan Collins stood clearly beside the secured storage cabinet, his visitor badge visible, the timestamp glowing in the upper corner of the recording with unquestionable precision. "Resume playback," Karen finally said. The video continued. Ethan carefully looked over his shoulder before opening the cabinet Marcus had locked only minutes earlier. He removed the prototype, placed it gently on the workbench, and began photographing every angle with his phone. Several close-up images captured circuit layouts, handwritten calibration notes, and component placement. He returned everything exactly as he had found it before quietly leaving the laboratory. The recording ended. Silence settled over the room again. One investigator slowly removed his glasses. That explains the similarities. Another analyst nodded toward the metadata reports spread across the table. Combined with the verified development timeline, there is no technical evidence supporting the accusation against Marcus Carter. Karen took a deep breath. "Is there any possibility these records have been manipulated?" The lead forensic specialist answered without hesitation. "No. 3 independent cloud servers verified the timestamps. The laboratory access system matches the security footage. The engineering journal aligns with every source code revision. From a forensic standpoint, Marcus Carter is the original creator." Across the table, the district legal advisor quietly closed the complaint file submitted that morning. "Then the allegation presented to law enforcement is unsupported by the evidence we have verified." Karen reached for the secure conference phone. "Bring Ethan Collins here immediately." Outside, the stadium remained wrapped in an almost unnatural stillness. The audience had stopped speculating. Even the television commentators lowered their voices as cameras occasionally focused on Marcus sitting patiently beneath the white canopy. His graduation gown moved gently in the afternoon breeze, while the gold honor stole rested quietly across his shoulders. The younger police officer approached him once more. "Marcus," he said softly, "if you had the chance to say one thing to everyone out here right now, what would it be?" Marcus looked toward the stage where his folded speech still rested in Principal Brooks's hands. "I would tell them to wait until all the facts arrive." The officer smiled faintly. "Not many people have that kind of patience." Marcus answered, "Truth has never been afraid of time." Inside the administrative building, Ethan entered the conference room with uncertain steps. His father was not there. Karen invited him to sit. She turned the monitor toward him and quietly pressed play. Ethan watched every second without interruption. When the recording ended, tears gathered in his eyes before he finally lowered his head into his hands. Nobody accused him. Nobody raised a voice. The evidence had already done that. Karen spoke gently. "Ethan, we need an honest answer." His shoulders trembled slightly. "Marcus built everything," he whispered. The room remained silent. Ethan took another slow breath. "I admired him. I really did. My father kept saying the invention was too valuable to leave in the hands of a teenager. He told me investors would never know where the ideas came from if we moved fast enough." He closed his eyes. "I copied the design after I photographed it. Marcus never knew." One committee member quietly asked, "Did Marcus ever give you permission to access his project?" Ethan immediately shook his head. "No, sir." Karen's expression softened with sadness rather than anger. "Why did you stay silent today?" Ethan struggled to answer. Because every minute the accusation continued, it became harder to admit the truth. The district legal advisor stood. "That statement is being entered into the official record." At that exact moment, Richard Collins entered the room after being escorted inside by school officials. He immediately noticed his son's expression. "Ethan, do not say another word." Ethan slowly stood and faced his father for the first time that afternoon. "Dad," he said quietly. I cannot keep taking someone else's future. Richard looked toward the investigators. This conversation requires legal counsel. Karen calmly placed the verified forensic report on the conference table. It also requires fact. She slid the documents toward him. Richard scanned the timestamps, the cloud authentication records, the source comparisons, and finally the laboratory security photographs. The confidence that had carried him through the entire day quietly disappeared. Nobody celebrated. Nobody smiled. The room simply fell into complete silence. Minutes later, the conference room doors opened. Karen Mitchell walked directly toward the stadium with the official findings in her hands, while President Daniel Whitmore, standing near the stage entrance, noticed her approaching expression. He looked once toward Marcus, sitting alone beneath the white canopy, then back at the report she carried. Without asking a single question, the president slowly rose to his feet. President Daniel Whitmore stepped forward before anyone else could speak. The movement was simple, almost quiet, yet it carried enough weight that every conversation across the stadium instantly faded away. Secret Service agents instinctively shifted with him, but the president gently raised one hand, signaling them to remain where they were. His eyes stayed fixed on Marcus Carter. Superintendent Karen Mitchell climbed the stage, carrying the investigation report with both hands. Principal Linda Brooks met her halfway, reading only the first page before covering her mouth in disbelief. She looked toward the officers beneath the white canopy and nodded once. The senior officer immediately understood. He walked over to Marcus, unlocked the handcuffs, and stepped back. Marcus, he said softly, on behalf of my department, I am sorry. The metal restraints slipped away without another sound. Marcus rubbed his wrists briefly, then offered the officer a respectful smile. Thank you for treating me with dignity, officer. The younger officer lowered his head. You showed all of us what dignity looks like today. Across the field, thousands of people watched in complete silence as Marcus slowly stood. Angela Carter wrapped both arms around Naomi, tears streaming freely down her face. Walter Carter simply closed his eyes for a brief moment before whispering, I knew truth would find its voice. On the opposite side of the stadium, Richard Collins remained frozen beside the media platform while reporters rapidly lowered their microphones, no longer interested in speculation. Their cameras now pointed somewhere else. Ethan Collins quietly walked away from his father and crossed the field alone. When he reached Marcus, he stopped several feet away. His voice shook. Marcus, I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I owe you the truth. Marcus looked at him without anger. Ethan continued, everything they found is real. You built it. I copied it. My father convinced me nobody would ever know. The words echoed through nearby television microphones. Richard closed his eyes as the admission spread across the stadium faster than any rumor had earlier that afternoon. President Whitmore climbed the final step onto the stage and accepted the investigation report from Karen Mitchell. He read only the summary before folding the document closed. Turning toward the audience, he spoke in a calm voice that carried naturally across the silent football field. Today was supposed to celebrate education. Instead, it reminded us why integrity matters even more than achievement. He paused before looking directly at Marcus. Young man, would you please join me? Marcus walked slowly back toward the stage. Every graduate watched him. Every teacher stood. Every member of the school board rose from their seats. Even the orchestra members quietly placed their instruments aside before standing with everyone else. Principal Brooks stepped forward, holding the folded valedictorian speech she had protected since the ceremony stopped. She carefully placed it back into Marcus's hands. I should never have taken this away from you, she whispered. Marcus accepted the pages with a grateful nod. Thank you for keeping them safe. President Whitmore turned toward the podium but did not stand behind it. Instead, he gently pulled the microphone aside and motioned toward Marcus. This platform belongs to the student who earned it. For several seconds, Marcus simply looked across the stadium. The same faces that had watched him leave the stage in handcuffs were now watching him return with his head held high. The silence no longer felt heavy. It felt respectful. Marcus unfolded his speech, then slowly folded it closed again. He placed the pages on the podium without reading a single line. I spent months writing a speech about success, he began quietly. But today taught me something much more important. His voice remained steady. Awards can be delayed. Recognition can be taken away. False accusations can spread faster than fact. But the truth keeps moving, even when nobody can see it yet. Nobody interrupted. Nobody looked away. Marcus glanced toward Ethan, who still stood near the front of the stage with tears in his eyes. Character is not measured by the moment everything goes right. Character is revealed when everything goes wrong and you still choose honesty. President Whitmore smiled almost imperceptibly. Around the stadium, one person began applauding, then another. Within seconds, the sound spread across every section until thousands of people stood together, applauding not only a brilliant young inventor, but the quiet strength that had carried him through the hardest afternoon of his life. The applause continued long after Marcus Carter stepped away from the podium, but what stayed with him was not the sound. It was the silence that came afterward. It was the kind of silence that only appeared when thousands of people realized they had witnessed something they would remember for the rest of their lives. The late afternoon sun settled lower above the Richmond skyline, covering the football field in a warm, golden light that softened every shadow stretching across the grass. Graduates slowly returned to their seats, parents wiped away quiet tears, and the orchestra gently lifted their instruments once more. This time, the music felt different. It no longer celebrated the end of high school alone. It celebrated the return of something far more valuable: trust. President Daniel Whitmore remained beside Marcus for a moment before speaking quietly enough that only those nearby could hear. "Young man," he said, "our country needs more inventors like you, but even more importantly, it needs citizens who carry themselves the way you did today." Marcus lowered his head respectfully. "Thank you, Mr. President." The president smiled. "Do not thank me. You reminded all of us that leadership begins long before someone receives a title." Nearby, Principal Linda Brooks approached Marcus holding a small velvet presentation case. Her hands trembled slightly. "This belongs to you," she said. Inside rested the state valedictorian medal that had been removed during the interruption. Marcus accepted it carefully, not because of the medal itself, but because of what it now represented. Principal Brooks looked him in the eyes. "I failed to protect one of my students today, and I will carry that lesson with me for the rest of my career," Marcus answered gently. "You protected the truth when it mattered most." Tears filled her eyes. "Thank you for giving me more grace than I deserve." Across the field, Richard Collins quietly stood alone while reporters packed away their cameras without asking another question. His reputation, built over decades, had changed in a single afternoon. Ethan slowly walked back toward his father. Neither of them spoke immediately. Finally, Richard broke the silence. "I wanted success for you." Ethan looked at the empty stage where Marcus had stood only minutes earlier. Success built on someone else's work is never really success. Richard closed his eyes, hearing his own words reflected back with a meaning he had never considered. He nodded once, not in victory, but in painful understanding. Angela Carter reached Marcus just beyond the stage steps and wrapped him in a long embrace. Naomi laughed through happy tears while Walter Carter rested one proud hand on his grandson's shoulder. "Remember what I told you yesterday?" Walter asked softly. Marcus smiled. "People admire success until it reminds them of what they failed to become." Walter nodded. "Now you understand the rest of it. Never let bitterness become your invention." Marcus looked around the stadium one final time. The handcuffs were gone. The accusation had disappeared beneath verified facts. The applause had faded into ordinary conversation. Yet one image remained stronger than everything else. Thousands of people from different backgrounds standing together because evidence had defeated assumption and integrity had defeated fear. Several weeks later, the official investigation concluded exactly as the forensic findings predicted. Marcus Carter's patent application moved forward under his own name, and his emergency communication system received federal research support through a university innovation partnership. Jefferson High School established a permanent ethics award in honor of the values demonstrated that afternoon, recognizing students who showed integrity under pressure rather than achievement alone. During orientation at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology that fall, Marcus was asked by another freshman whether he wished everyone could forget what happened at graduation. He smiled before answering. "No, I hope they remember all of it, not because of me, but because the truth deserves witnesses." Years later, visitors walking through Jefferson High School would notice a bronze plaque mounted beside the entrance to the engineering laboratory. It did not mention accusations, investigations, or public embarrassment. It carried only one sentence beneath Marcus Carter's name. A sentence future students paused to read before entering the room where new ideas would one day be born. It simply said, "Integrity does not become valuable when someone believes you. It was valuable all along." As evening settled over Richmond and the final graduates left the football field with their families, the American flag continued moving gently above the empty stadium. The chairs would be folded away. The stage would be removed. The cameras would leave. But the quiet victory earned by one patient young man would remain far longer than any ceremony, reminding everyone who heard his story that kindness is never weakness, truth does not fear time, and real greatness is measured not by the moment you are celebrated, but by the character you refuse to surrender when the world doubts you.